Hello, I'm Dick Fleming, a retired civil servant, formerly an interpreter working at the European Union. In a previous video about simultaneous interpreting aimed at trainee interpreters, I talked about the similarities and differences between consecutive and simultaneous interpretation. And I set out a few golden rules for those of you starting out on simultaneous interpreting. This video is also aimed at trainee interpreters, but takes things a little further and describes the sort of training you'll be doing in order to get your simultaneous up to professional level. Perhaps I should start though by briefly recapping those golden rules. Number one, don't expect, particularly when you're just starting simultaneous, to interpret everything. Go for quality rather than quantity. In other words, whatever you say in your interpretation should make sense and be faithful to the original, even if you only manage to convey half of the original ideas. So only interpret what you've heard and understood. Number two, express those ideas clearly and forcefully in natural language and in complete sentences. Number three, make life easier for yourself by speaking in short sentences. And finally, make your exercises more realistic and rewarding by making sure that you always have someone listening to you whenever you practice. So, those were the golden rules, which I've recapped now, in spite of the time constraints of this type of video, because I believe that they will prove useful for you, not just at the beginning, but also throughout the learning process, and even later when you're working professionally as a simultaneous interpreter. For example, let's imagine you're at a conference and out of the blue you're confronted with a very difficult speaker. Maybe he's a bad speaker, or he's not speaking his mother tongue, or he's been told to compress his 15-minute speech, a copy of which you don't have, into 5 minutes. What do? Well, you apply the coping tactics you will have learnt on your interpreting course, and also learnt later on. You'll pick out the ideas you understand, and you'll do your best to convey those ideas clearly, probably keeping your sentences short and your language pretty basic and concise, but still natural. In that way, you will hopefully salvage the gist of the message for your listeners. It's what you could call damage limitation, what others have called crisis management, and we have to do quite a lot of that in our daily work. But wait a minute, I've jumped here a bit, haven't I, from talking about starting simultaneous to working as a professional. So how are you going to get from there to there? Well, you're going to have to apply your golden rules to speeches which will get gradually more and more demanding. Once you're capable of picking out the basic ideas from a simple speech and conveying them naturally and clearly in your own language, your trainers will then ratchet up the difficulty of the speeches that you have to practice from. And what do we mean by simple? Well, lots of things. Clear, simple ideas expressed in natural language. Everything should be explicit, no obscure references, and also delivered reasonably slowly with meaning-enhancing stress, intonation and conviction, and probably not too long. Also, the subject is very important. Is it familiar to you or totally new? Is it accessible to the layman, or do you need technical knowledge to understand it properly? As I said, your teachers will gradually increase the difficulty of these speeches. The ideas will get more complicated, possibly the language used will get more sophisticated. The speeches may be delivered faster, and the subjects may become less familiar to you. Or should I say less familiar initially, because your teachers will be showing you how to familiarize yourself with almost any subject under the sun by reading up about it, in the same way as professional interpreters read up about the subject of the meeting beforehand. All the time they'll be stretching you so that you successfully apply these golden rules to more and more difficult speeches. And alongside that, they'll be teaching you new skills. So what are these new skills? Well, there's quite a long list, but I'll mention just some of them. First of all, summarizing. Now, you will have done that during consecutive, but it's particularly useful for fast and dense speeches where information is coming at you thick and fast. Then there's simplification. It's similar but not quite the same as summarizing, and it's to be used when you're in danger of getting tied up in a complicated passage and you're in danger of getting behind. Then there's explanation, which can be useful when straightforward translation might not be enough for your audience to understand fully. Then we've got generalization, helpful when you can't cope with a stream of examples. Then omission, which can make your version easier to digest than if you leave in all the unnecessary clutter. But it can still be just as complete ideas-wise, provided you omit the right bits. Then there's the opposite of omission, what I would call filler exercises, padding if you like, where you add something perhaps to fill gaps or to play for time. Then you have reformulation, which I think speaks for itself, but it involves not just changing words, but using completely different expressions, different word order and different sentence structure. And then, very useful indeed, particularly for those of you working from languages like German or Finnish, we have anticipation. Trying to work out how the speaker is going to finish his or her sentence. Without that anticipation, working from some of the languages I've just mentioned, we get far too much behind the speaker. And on the question of being far behind the speaker, one of the key points you'll be practicing is exactly how far you should be behind the speaker when you're interpreting, the so-called recul. You should be far enough behind to be ensure that you're processing complete ideas and not just individual words, but close enough not to get completely uncoupled from the train of thought. Another key skill to be developed is maintaining a high degree of concentration while your attention is divided between listening to the original, reprocessing the ideas, and checking on what you are saying. It's what we call split attention. It's a skill you will have developed to a certain extent in consecutive when you were listening to a speech and taking notes at the same time, but it will require an awful lot of practice in simultaneous before it becomes second nature. You'll also need to learn how to switch your attention quickly, either to listening more to the speaker, concentrating more on reprocessing, or concentrating more on checking your output, because you'll need to switch that attention according to the particular problems that arise with a particular speech. The above list could be described as a set of techniques or coping tactics. And as I said before, you'll be asked to apply all of these skills, including the original golden rules, to the speeches that you'll be given on your course. Some of those speeches will be delivered by your teachers or other people who come to help. In other words, they'll be delivered spontaneously in the room, but a very large number of them, more and more towards the end of the course, will be speeches recorded from real meetings, which will enable you to cope with the sort of difficulties you'll have to cope with later on in professional life. Some of these speeches may be very fast, may be delivered by non-native speakers, and as I said, all the time you'll be asked to provide a clear and naturally worded rendering into your active language or active languages for whoever is listening to you, and it might be your teacher or it might be a fellow student. We also have to remember that many of you will also be practicing the retour, i.e. practicing working in simultaneous into another active language from your main active language. And practically all of you will also practice working in relay, in other words, taking a feed from another booth and interpreting that again. So, All of these things, and then if you on top of that throw in teamwork in the booth and booth behavior and manners, you can see that there are an awful lot of things to learn, which is why interpreter training courses never seem to be quite long enough. There are all these skills that need to be acquired, and we mustn't forget that it's not just a question of learning about them, it's actually a question of really digesting them, and it's that practice which takes such a long time. I would say that you don't need to worry, just go for it, and I would say the best of luck to all of you who are embarking upon Simultaneous, and above all, however difficult it gets, just remember these golden rules while you're acquiring these new techniques and tactics, and all the best. Thank you.